In 1515, a woman named Margrete Schmidt was dragged into a Nuremberg dungeon, screaming that she would rather burn at the stake than face what awaited her inside. Within 6 hours, she was begging her captives to end her life. But that is not even the worst part. What Margrete faced was a device so psychologically devastating that hardened criminals would confess to crimes they never committed, just to avoid it. A machine that broke the strongest minds, without spilling a single drop of blood. And here is the twisted part. The Church considered it merciful. By the end of this video, you will understand why historians tried to bury this story, and why the psychological techniques used in this medieval nightmare are still being debated by interrogation experts today. But before we dive into this dark chapter of human cruelty, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you will need something to distract your mind after what you are about to learn. I am about to reveal 3 shocking truths. A device so horrific that prisoners chose death over enduring it. A torture method that shattered human minds in just hours. And the disturbing reason why this machine was actually considered an act of mercy. Let us begin with the machine itself. To understand the true horror of what is coming, you need to picture medieval Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries. This was an era where justice was not about rehabilitation, it was about extracting confessions, and the church and state had perfected the art of enhanced interrogation. But here is what most people do not realize. By this time, torturers had discovered something far more effective than breaking bones or burning flesh. They had learned that the human mind was far more fragile than the human body. Physical torture, you see, had limitations. A person could pass out, go into shock, or simply die before giving up their secrets. But psychological torture could go on indefinitely, and the victim would remain conscious and aware throughout every agonizing moment. The authorities needed confessions for witch trials, heresy charges, and political conspiracies, and they needed these confessions to be detailed, specific, and implicating others. Traditional torture methods were producing too many deaths and not enough useful information. So they innovated. What emerged was a device that would redefine human suffering forever. It did not rely on pain, it relied on something far more primitive and terrifying. The human imagination. Today, we are exploring the torture device that made grown men weep before it even touched them, that caused women to confess to witchcraft within hours, and that broke the human spirit so completely that victims would literally beg for death as a mercy. This is the story of the Iron Maiden, but not the version you think you know. What I am about to tell you will change how you understand both medieval justice and the darkest corners of human psychology. The machine that awaited Margrete Schmidt in that Nuremberg dungeon was not designed to kill her quickly. Picture this: you are standing in a stone chamber, torches flickering against damp walls. Before you stands what looks like a metal coffin, roughly human-shaped, with a face carved into its surface, but this face is twisted into an expression of eternal agony. The executioner opens the front panel, revealing the interior lined with iron spikes. But here is what nobody tells you about the Iron Maiden's true horror. Those spikes were not designed to kill you quickly. Hans Schmidt, no relation to our victim Margrete, was the executioner of Nuremberg from 1501 to 1532, and his personal diary reveals the terrifying truth. The spikes were carefully measured and positioned. They would pierce your body when the door closed, but they were precisely placed to avoid vital organs. The points enter the flesh at the shoulders, chest, and legs, Schmidt wrote. But the condemned can survive for many hours, perhaps even days, if we are careful with the placement. But the physical pain was not the worst part, it was the waiting. Imagine being locked inside this metal coffin, unable to move, with iron spikes pressed against your skin. Every breath you take pushes the spikes slightly deeper. Every heartbeat sends waves of pain through your body. You cannot see anything, you cannot move, you can only wait. And here is the psychological masterstroke. Before closing the door, the executioner would describe exactly what was going to happen. He would explain how the spikes would slowly work their way deeper with each breath, how your own body would become your torturer, how you could end this suffering at any time by simply confessing. Schmidt's diary reveals that most prisoners broke within the first hour, not from pain, but from the mental anguish of anticipating what was coming next. Margrete Schmidt confessed to Congress with the devil after 2 hours in the Maiden, Hans wrote. She provided names of 17 other witches and begged for immediate execution. But here is where this story takes an even darker turn. The authorities in Nuremberg had discovered something that would make the traditional Iron Maiden look like child's play. They made one crucial modification that turned a torture device into a machine that could break the human mind in ways that still horrify psychologists today. The modification was simple but diabolical. They added small viewing holes to the Iron Maiden's face, allowing the victim to see out into the chamber. Why would they do this? Because they discovered that complete sensory deprivation was not the most effective psychological torture. Partial sensory input was far worse. Through these holes, prisoners could watch other victims being tortured, they could see the executioner preparing his tools, they could observe the faces of the crowd that had gathered to watch their suffering. But they could not participate, could not scream effectively, could not beg for mercy. The Spanish Inquisition records from Toledo, preserved in their archives from 1478 to 1834, document exactly what this psychological torture accomplished. The heretic Maria Gonzalez was placed in the viewing Iron Maiden at the hour of prime, reads one entry from 1487. By the hour of tur, she had confessed to heretical practices. By the hour of sex, she had provided the names of her accomplices. By evening prayer, she was begging the guards to end her torment through any means necessary. That is a complete psychological breakdown in less than 6 hours. But here is what nobody tells you about why this technique was so devastatingly effective. It exploited a fundamental aspect of human psychology that we now understand through modern neuroscience. When you can see but cannot act, when you can observe but cannot participate, your brain enters a state of learned helplessness that is far more damaging than physical pain. You become a prisoner, not just of the device, but of your own mind. Dr. Margaret Rothsky, a modern psychologist who studied historical torture methods, explained it this way. The viewing holes created a paradox of awareness. The victim was simultaneously isolated and exposed, hidden and observed. This cognitive dissonance can break the human psyche faster than any physical trauma. The Inquisition records show that prisoners in the viewing Iron Maiden would often provide not just confessions, but detailed accusations against family members, friends, and neighbors, anything to make the psychological torment stop. But do not click away yet, because what happened next made the viewing Iron Maiden seem merciful by comparison. The church authorities, always looking for more humane methods of extracting confessions, developed a version that prisoners would literally fight each other for the chance to experience. In 1523, Pope Adrian issued a papal bull authorizing what the Church called the Iron Maiden of Mercy. The document preserved in the Vatican Secret Archives reveals the twisted logic behind this so-called improvement. The merciful version eliminated the spikes entirely. At first glance, this seems like genuine progress, a torture device without the torture. But the Church had discovered something far more sinister, the power of pure psychological warfare. Picture yourself being locked inside a metal coffin in complete darkness, unable to move, with just enough air to survive. No spikes threatening to pierce your flesh, no immediate physical danger, just waiting. The papal authorization documents reveal the diabolic psychology behind this design. The sinner faced with the prospect of indefinite confinement in darkness will contemplate their sins and seek absolution through truthful confession. But here is the horrifying reality. Prisoners in the merciful Iron Maiden would experience complete sensory deprivation, combined with the psychological terror of not knowing when or if they would ever be released. Brother Francesco de Marco, a monk who administered this torture in Rome, kept detailed records of its effectiveness. His journals described prisoners who would begin hallucinating within hours. They would hear voices of deceased family members, they would see demons in the darkness, they would confess to crimes that existed only in their fractured minds. Lorenzo Medici, suspected of heresy, was placed in the Maiden of Mercy at dawn, De Marco wrote. By midday he was weeping, by evening he was speaking to his dead mother, by the following dawn he had confessed to practicing witchcraft, though no evidence of such practices existed. The most disturbing aspect, Prisoners who had experienced both versions would actually beg to be put back in the spiked Iron Maiden rather than endure the merciful version. "The pain of the spikes is nothing compared to the pain of the mind," wrote one prisoner in a letter smuggled out of a papal prison. "At least with the spikes, you know your suffering has a limit. In the darkness, your suffering has no end." The Church considered this progress, because no blood was shed, no bones were broken, and technically no physical harm was inflicted. They had created what they believed was a humane method of extracting confessions. But here is what nobody tells you about the final and most disturbing truth behind the Iron Maiden, the discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about medieval torture. The Iron Maiden was often completely empty. Archaeological excavations of medieval torture chambers across Europe have revealed something that historians tried to keep quiet for decades. Many of the Iron Maidens found in castle dungeons and Inquisition chambers show no evidence of ever being used. No blood stains on the spikes, no wear patterns from struggling prisoners, no scratch marks from fingernails clawing at the interior. What they found instead were elaborate mechanisms designed to create sound effects. Dr. Heinrich Müller, who led excavations at Nuremberg Castle in 1987, discovered a series of pulleys, bells, and echo chambers built into the Iron Maiden's base. When activated, these mechanisms could simulate the sounds of a prisoner trapped inside, groaning, pleading, even the sound of spikes penetrating flesh. The ultimate psychological torture was not physical at all, it was pure theater. Here is how it worked. A prisoner would be brought into the torture chamber and shown the Iron Maiden. They would hear testimonies from previous victims, actually paid actors, describing the horrors they had endured. They would listen to the realistic sounds of someone being tortured inside the device. Then they would be told that they could avoid this fate by confessing immediately, or they could experience it themselves. The confession rate was over 90%. The Spanish Inquisition perfected this technique, creating what they called theaters of confession, entire chambers designed to break prisoners psychologically before any physical torture ever began. This discovery fundamentally changed how historians understand medieval justice. The period we thought was characterized by brutal physical torture was actually far more sophisticated and far more sinister. These were not just torturers, they were psychological warfare experts. The techniques developed for the Iron Maiden directly influenced modern interrogation methods, the good cop bad cop routine, the use of psychological pressure instead of physical force, the creation of false scenarios to extract confessions. Military psychologists studying these medieval records helped develop interrogation techniques used in World War II, the Cold War, and even modern counterterrorism operations. But here is the most disturbing consequence of all. The false confessions, extracted through Iron Maiden theater, helped fuel the European witch trials. Thousands of innocent people were executed based on confessions that were obtained through pure psychological manipulation. The device that was supposed to reveal truth, instead, created elaborate lies. It turned neighbors against neighbors, families against themselves, and entire communities into instruments of persecution. The Iron Maiden disappeared from European torture chambers by the late 16th century, not because it was inhumane, but because authorities realized that confessions obtained through psychological manipulation were often useless for actual criminal investigations. But its legacy lived on, in ways that still shape our world today. The Iron Maiden taught us something terrifying about human nature. That our minds are far more fragile than our bodies and that the most devastating torture requires no physical violence at all. This device changed the nature of justice forever, transforming confession from an act of conscience into a product of psychological manipulation. It showed that fear could be manufactured, that guilt could be implanted, and that the truth could be shaped by those who controlled the narrative. Today we are still grappling with these lessons. False confessions remain a leading cause of wrongful convictions. Psychological interrogation techniques continue to evolve, and the line between justice and psychological coercion remains frighteningly thin. The Iron Maiden may be gone, but its shadow still falls across our legal systems, our understanding of human psychology, and our definitions of what constitutes humane treatment. So, here is my question for you: And really think about this before you answer. Given what we know about the power of psychological manipulation, how can we ever be certain that any confession is truly voluntary? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this exploration of history's darkest innovations as disturbing as I did, make sure you are subscribed because next week I am revealing the medieval execution method that was so horrific. It was banned by the church itself and the reason why it is making a comeback in some parts of the world today. Thanks for watching and I will see you in the next.